Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is have jack up and running and cue jack control. And this goes without saying. I mean, this is for every single audio program pretty much that's going to do anything worthwhile on Linux. You're going to need to be using jack. So I'm assuming you already have jack installed and set up. If not, then go figure that out first. And I'm not going to go over it in this video. So do that first and then come back. And then after that, you just install Swami, which is just sudo apt get install Swami if you're using a Debian-based installation like Ubuntu and all that stuff. Once you have that, then you could go ahead and run Swami after you have jack started and a MIDI controller connected to your computer. So let's go ahead and start up Swami. And there it is. And I'm going to shrink my head down. Put me in the corner. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up one that I started yesterday. I actually started working on this yesterday, and then I was like, well, I should make a video on this, so I stopped. I didn't go very far, so you guys will still be able to see everything I'm doing, and I probably won't do the whole thing on here anyways, because it'll get kind of boring if I go on too long. But I want you to get the idea of how to do this. So the first thing you're going to do is when you come into Swami, you're going to go into File and then hit New Soundfont. And then once you do that, it's going to put something down here. It'll probably just say Soundfont or be blank. And then you can go to the Properties window down here in the bottom, and you put in what you want to call it. And for this Soundfont, I'm actually creating a Soundfont that is samples of my Tama Imperial Star drum set. And I actually have those samples part of another Soundfont already, but I wanted to create an individual Soundfont that just had that Tama Imperial Star drum set on it. And plus the other one that I did, I kind of mapped them a little bit strangely. So I want this to be a little more standard and user-friendly. So after you name the Soundfont, then you're going to click this little arrow over here on the left, and that's going to expand all of these submenus in the Soundfont. So the way you want to think about this is you need to work from the bottom up. And that'll make sense here in a few minutes, but with the exception of ROM samples, because we're not working with a ROM is, like a piece of hardware, so we're not going to be working with a ROM, but we are going to be working with samples. And you'll notice that I already loaded in a bunch of samples there. And what these actual samples are, I actually went around with a microphone or some microphones and mic'd up, all of the drums and cymbals on this Tama Imperial Star, which is the kit that I'm playing right here. I, mic'd up all the drums and then just created samples from every single drum and every single sample on the entire kit. And then I started loading them into here. So the way that you load them into here is you just right-click on samples and then go to Load Samples. And that'll bring up a file browser. And then you can see I have a lot of Soundfonts in here. But if I go down to, where is it? My Tama Imperial Star. And here are all the samples. These are all the raw samples. Now, of course, I had to go and trim all of these samples to the way that I wanted them, and normalize and maximize them and do all of that. I guess I could have gone over that as well, but I'm not. So we're just going to do this part for now. But I'll make another video on that, and we can connect those two later on. But so, I cut all the samples up and, made them each individual. Like I have 3 different kick samples here. It's all the same kick drum. I just hit it a little bit differently 3 times just to give you some variation of sounds. And then these are all of the hi-hats and the floor tom, open hi-hat, crash cymbals, bell cymbal, etc. Like everything that's on there. The toms, ride, the bell on the ride on the edge, the tip of the ride, the stacker, all that stuff. So what you do is if you have a whole folder full of samples, then you can just press Control A and select all, then click Add. And that's how I did this. And then I got all of these in here. Once you have all of your samples loaded, what you're going to do is you're going to go to Instruments. And then you do a similar thing. You just right click on the instruments folder and then you click new instrument. And then a new instrument will pop up there and then you can name it whatever you want. And I just called mine Imperial Star Kit, just because that's all it is. And we're just going to work with that one that I already created. And as far as the envelopes and modulators and controls, we're not going to mess with these yet. We're going to leave all of that as is for the time being. And so, okay. So now you'll notice that underneath Imperial Star, I have 3 kicks. And let me go ahead first, and I want to connect my MIDI controller, my nano key, to Fluid Synth. Swami uses Fluid Synth as well. You may remember me talking about Q Synth using Fluid Synth. And Swami is essentially another Fluid Synth player, but it gives you the ability to edit as well as play. So it's pretty cool. Where was I? So yeah, connect your MIDI controller. I'm using the nano key today, connecting it to my Fluid Synth. And then now, if I push my C1, then you'll hear that first kick sample. But I didn't tell you how to do that yet, so don't worry. But okay. I already have all the kicks in there, so we're going to start with the snare drum now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to snare 1. And let's sample that. You can just press your MIDI controller, and you can hear how it sounds. Okay, so to get this into there, all we need to do is go to Copy. And then we're going to go to click on Imperial Star Kit again, and then right click, and then click Paste. And now that you'll see that that snare is right there. But you see this red bar? Now if I push, the whole keyboard is snare, basically. Except for down here, that's kick and snare together. But we don't want that. We want just snare on a single key. So the way to do that is we're going to move this dot first off. And that's the root note, that blue dot. So if we click down here on root note, the down button, it's going to slide that over there. Now if I press that same key that the kicks are on, or the first kick is on, you'll hear the kick and the snare. But we still don't want that. What we want is this to be on its own key. So we're going to slide this red bar over to here, the next one up from the last one that I used. Now we're going to slide this side down to there, so it's only one key. But that's not quite right, because, well, first off, I don't want it on that key. I want it on the key next to that one, because that's a black key. Okay. But you'll notice that this pitch is still, it's a little bit weird. That's because we went up from the root note. So we're going to have to move this root note up to where that actually is. So now that actually sounds the pitch that it was originally supposed, or the original pitch that it was sampled at. We're going to do the same thing on these other kick samples as well, because I never did that yesterday. Okay, so now if we play, there's my first kick. I mean, there's 3 kicks, it's a little bit redundant, but this is just me because I like having the slight variations in sound because there was 3 different samples. And the reason why I like that is because when you're making a beat, it sounds more realistic to have like just slight differences in the sound. So yeah, you get the idea. Okay, so let's move on. Let's do our second snare. And actually, I probably could have left that snare on the black key because I forgot there's 3 of them, but I'll just put snare 2 there. Let's copy snare 2. And then right-click, paste. And I'm doing this part first, but you can do the root note first or do the, the slider part first, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Oops. Okay, so now we have 2 snares. Let's go back to snare 3. Oops. Copy. Oops, what did I just do? Okay, so you get the idea of how to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to finish putting all of these samples in, and then I'll show you the next step. Oh, actually, no. Before I do that, I want to show you how to save it, because saving in Swami is a little bit strange. And the first time I tried to make one, I wasn't doing it right, and I ended up spending hours on a single sound font and then lost everything I did. Your first inclination would be to go to File, and then Save All. And you'd think that that would work, but it doesn't. So what you're going to want to do is actually highlight the sound font that you want to save, and then you right-click that, and then you go to Save. And then here, this other little File menu pops up, and this is like, it's just a really weird thing. Then you're going to highlight this, and then you're going to click Browse, and go to where you want to save it. I already created one here, but if you hadn't created a new file yet, you're going to name it, and then it's .sf2 is the file format. Make sure you type in .sf2, and then you click Save. And then, with that still highlighted there, you have to click Save there. So it's a lot of save buttons you have to push to make sure it actually saves, but definitely make sure you do that pretty often, because there's nothing worse than spending hours creating one of these things only to lose everything that you did. Like, that's a terrible, terrible feeling. And that happened to me. Like I said, I was working on a synth one where I had all these like multi-timbral sounds like layered and like all this crazy stuff going on, and it took me like so long, and it just was completely gone after that I screwed up. So I wanted to mention that before we moved on. So let me go ahead and finish layering these samples in here, and then I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. So I had a couple of problems there. I had like a power outage, and then basically the sound font, I guess because of the power going out or something, the hard drive that I was writing to, it caused the sound font that I was working on to become completely corrupted. So I had to start over from scratch and do this all again. And then I re-recorded some videos to talk you through all of that, or parts of that, but then realized that something else had happened to my microphone during that power surge as well, so that wasn't working. So now I finally am back, but I already have pretty much the entire thing done here, but I think that's okay. I can still describe to you what I actually did. So basically, where we left off, we were taking samples and putting them into the instrument, which we call drum set. And on this new version, I ended up putting multiple samples on each key, and then switching over to velocity and setting different velocities for different notes, which I believe I was talking about right before the power went off, I think. But if not, maybe I should go over that again. So what you can do, for example, like here on the kick drum, I have 3 different kick drum samples on here, all 3 of these, and they're all on the same note. So I did that the same way I did before, by dragging the little green sliders over, then putting that blue dot on the correct note that I wanted to be played on. And then I go into velocity, and it's very similar. You just drag, this is the first sample, so this is all the lower velocity notes the first sample will play. Then in the middle, you'll have the second sample, then the third sample will be the hardest notes being played. So it's pretty cool. You can do that, and that works really good for cymbals. If you want to get like different expression out of like a ride cymbal, for example, it's really good to drums in general. It's just good. So once you have all of your samples set up and everything's mapped to the keys that you want them to be, what you need to do then is actually create a preset. And to do that, all you need to do is just right-click in this preset area and then go to New Preset. And then what's going to happen, if you're working on drums, you'll want to keep this checked as percussion, and then you give it a name. If you're working on a synth sound or some other type of instrument, then you can uncheck percussion and put in which bank you want it to be in. But percussion defaults to bank 128 on MIDI channel 10. That's just how it works in MIDI. So yeah, and then once you do that, I already created one here, and I just called it Tama Imperial Star, as you can see, and we click all those. We can hear some of the notes. I'll go up and so you can hear the whole thing. All right, and once you get all of that, you just make sure to save it, which I'm not going to do because I already did it, but make sure you do it the way I showed you, which is by going to the SF2 part here itself, right-click it and go to Save As, and then highlight that little thing, click Browse, then select where you want to save it, and then hit Save, and then you highlight it again and click Save there. So yeah, it's a lot of saves, but that's what you have to do to make sure you actually save it. So once you do all of that, you can close Swami. And now to test it, we can go, basically what we can do is we can open up QSynth, which is our regular Soundfont player. And then we can add another Soundfont by clicking this little plus symbol down here. Let's call this one Imperial Star. And then we click on the Soundfonts tab, we go to Open, then browse to wherever you save the sound font, open it there, and click OK. And this won't quite work just yet because remember we saved that preset. We have to go in and select that on the channel that we're using. So right now the input's going to be on number 1, so I just double click. I should do that slower so you saw what I did. Click the Channels button here on QSynth, and then you double click this, and then there's that channel, bank 128. Click OK, and you'll notice how it already put it on channel 10. That's because, like I said before, MIDI always defaults percussion Soundfonts to channel 10. That's just what it does. And then once you do that, you can close that window and then connect your MIDI controller, and then it should work. And there it is. And you could also open this up in QTractor. You could use the CAF Fluid Synth interface as a plugin, and then you can load your Soundfonts that way. You could use it in Rose Garden, Ardor, any of the audio software DAWs for Linux that can load Soundfonts or have a plugin that you can load Soundfont. You could use these, and that's why they're really cool. For Rose Garden, what I like to do if I'm using Rose Garden is just use QSynth and then load them all into there. And then I use Rose Garden, has some pretty good mapping where you can you can map different channels to different sound fonts pretty easily. And I should do a tutorial on that too, because Rose Garden, even though it's a little bit old and a little limited, it still is pretty cool. It does some pretty interesting things. Like there's some kind of neat effects you can do with it, and for MIDI programming it is pretty nice, and it has notation, which is nice as well. So a little bit off topic, but that just got me thinking that I should do a Rose Garden tutorial, just because I think a lot of people would benefit from that. And hopefully you found this tutorial educational and helpful, and if you did, please click that like button down below. If you want to download this Soundfont, the link for that is also down below, and make sure you subscribe. And if you get a chance, check out my Patreon page, which is linked up in the upper, whatever that thing is, the little button that pops up. And yeah, so that's all for today. And thanks for watching. This is Justin, aka Demonic Sweaters, signing out. Have a good night, everybody.